Hello and welcome back to the podcast. We're here again to have another interesting chat about another interesting topic. But before we get into all of that, how are you doing, Sam?
I'm good. We're under a bit of pressure this week on our first heat pump install that we're kind of working with, working for a different contract, getting a bit of experience. And we've had some interesting realizations that some of the circuit protection, which I think we'll probably do a bit of a podcast on, or maybe even touching on this, I don't know, about the RCD protection on all that, and it's cost us a pretty penny. So yeah, it's been an interesting week.
Painful lessons, aren't they, when you venture into new spaces? And we've just been through it with all the solar stuff, so I sympathise, and it'll be worth it in the end, mate. It has to be, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But before we get into today's topic as well, we do have a few things to mention that we often forget at the start of these, so we're going to do that before we carry on. But we are going to install a show first up, and that is on the 24th to the 26th of June, and we're not going unarmed. Sam's got a few bits and pieces over there, and I've got some here. So if you're lucky enough and you come along,
we've got some stuff to give away. So we've got some travel mugs that will be handed out at the show. We're going to do some really interesting conversations at the show with interesting people. We're kind of setting up hopefully a bit of an itinerary. It's going to be the first show we've done, so we're going to kind of do our best and probably learn from this one. But we've got some interesting guests lined up to do some interesting talks, and as part of that, we'll be giving people that attend some travel mugs. We've got this pad, which I'm using now.
These are really nice.
Yeah.
I like these. I'm going
bougie,
to have to pinch one, I think.
Yeah, you'll have to come to the show, Mark.
Yeah, that's it.
We've also got some mugs that we're giving away. We've also got some T-shirts and what have you, which we haven't had time to change into. But we've got plenty of stuff to give away. And you've also already sorted out some other bits, haven't you? With
we have. Yeah, we've got some beers that we're going to be giving out, some branded ones. That's just reminded me I need to work on the logo because it's going to final print. So I'll get that cleared with you later on this week. But yeah, come along, and we've got a few bits and pieces to give out, primarily to have a chat with you all as well, and maybe get some recordings for the podcast itself. That's the main kind of thrust of what we're doing there, isn't it? So do come and say hello. Don't be shy, and we don't bite. We just give you free things.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're hoping to get a bit of interaction directly for the podcast as well. So we have thought about bringing people in terms of like a bit of an audience and having like a big communal chat. And this will kind of be the first throes of that, won't it? As like getting people to come and ask questions whilst we've got, someone from... don't want to put them on the spot, but Genius Roofing said they were happy to come and do like a Q&A about roofing solutions and all of that. So if you've got a question about renewables, we're hoping to get the guests in, and also potentially leave, depending on when this one comes out, leave a comment on who you would like to speak to at the show, and we'll see if we can set it up. But yeah, we've got some really interesting people that are semi-lined up. We just need to cross the T's and dot the I's on it all.
Yeah, we've got a lot of admin we're still yet to get to. We're ill-prepared. But we do have another feature we want to mention that you might not be aware of. And if you're listening to this or watching it on Spotify, we have the function now where you can kind of forward load future episodes. It's like $2.99 a month. So we've tried to keep that cost as low as we can whilst not delaying releases to the general normal release every week that we do. But it's just to raise a bit of extra funds into the show. And it seemed like a nice thing to do. And we've so far had a little handful of people joining up.
We have indeed, and thank you very much to those people that have done. And I know what it's like when I'm listening to podcasts. Our conversations seem to get longer and longer because they're just so. When you've got a guest that's maybe travelled halfway up the country to join you, you want to try and get as much information as possible out of that person. But I know for me, I tend to get put off if I load the podcast and it's like 2.5 hours long. So we tend to split ours up, which people seem to be happy with. But I also know when I'm into a topic that I really want to hear about, I want to just keep that conversation rolling. And if it's a long journey like we both do, sometimes having that opportunity to play both of those podcasts back to back would be really good. And that's what we've allowed on the subscriber setup on Spotify, where you can have the next 3 episodes?
I think there's two. We might load it out further, but there's 2 every week at the minute.
Yeah, so you got the one that's you've got, and then the next 2.
Yeah, the one that's current released, and then 2 future ones.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, if you're interested in that, head over to Spotify, and we'd really appreciate your support. Help us grow the podcast, get bigger and better guests, and more guests as well.
More beers to give out at trade shows when we go. It all goes into the same kitty. But we can come back to our topic now because it's an interesting one, and I raised this one because I'd seen Sam doing it on his Instagram, and I don't know if it's out on YouTube yet. Is it? Have you shared
No,
it?
it's not out on YouTube. It'll be probably the next few weeks. Or
Yes.
might be at the point of this being released, to be fair, but not at the point of this being filmed.
Okay. So I can hold my hand up happily that I've done something similar, but not been brave enough to share it on social media. So fair play to you, mate. And it's wall-mounted solar panels, isn't it?
It is indeed, and I have to say, I did worry about putting it out online because coming straight out of the bat, we made it up. We made up how to fit this because there is pretty much zero out there unless you're doing a full facade system on like a big commercial building where it's fitting in with the cladding that they're having, and it's a very specialist system. There's nothing really out there domestically, or so I thought until I went to solar and storage. And so yeah, we basically made a system up and probably overkilled it because we were so terrified of something happening, and there was no real design calculations that we could really kind of fall back on, and so we used this type of kit that we use day in day out, the Van der Valk rail system, and we put some little supports underneath the panels to stop any slippage. And then the customer wanted a solar skirt around it as well, which actually worked really well because it hid all these little brackets and stuff that we put on. And I've had mixed reviews. I've had people say they hate it, and I've had people say they love it. And that's always the start of some really good content.
Yes, it is. I mean, you will always, it's a Marmite thing, isn't it? I think there's a few aspects there. One is kind of the structural one, and then also the appearance of maybe neighbours looking at these things and the area around it. My own view of that is that if it's kind of on your property and not really facing the road and such, or anyone else's back garden, it's probably not that much of a big deal. But if you've got a whole front of your house filled with solar panels, that might be something that planning maybe needs to look at or something.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think it's not something that is very common. It's become very common to see these panels on people's roofs, and so it's one of them where people, when something new comes out, as I remember the conversations around when the feed-in tariff was around, when people started putting these big blue and silver sheets of glass on their roof, and people thought, they're putting a Velux window in, or what they're doing, and people hated them, and some people loved them. And so it's going to be interesting to see over the next 5 years if we get to a point with wall-mounted panels that we are now with roof-mounted panels, where people kind of go, oh yeah, they've got solar panels. Because I do think that it's going to be my personal view is I do think it's going to be a big thing, because some people have really tight or really old roofs that they don't want to tackle because they're not going to have to tackle the roof and do the solar panels at the same time, and the cost of that can be quite big. Whereas if you're fitting a panel on the side of your house, we're now up to, I think that panel was a 510 watts, about half a kilowatt in one panel. So it means you can make really good use of, like in that case in the video that I put out, or will be out by this point, it's going to basically be half a kilowatt on one bit of wall that actually the road and the neighbours don't really see that much, but it adds a lot of generation to his early morning kind of generation arc. So
Yeah.
he's absolutely over the moon with it.
That's the main thing, isn't it? Is the customers need to want it, and I think that's the driving, as you've said, the driving force behind it. You might have dormer windows in the south-facing roof, for example, or as you've said, an old roof structure that people just don't want to mess with. Or it might be that you've got a really nice south-facing wall that you can put some panels on for some winter generation because they're at a steeper angle and the sun's coming more at them as it's lower on the horizon. You can see all these things pushing people towards considering it, whereas if you've got 200 watt panels of the past and you might need to put 4 or 5 of them to get to the same scale you're at with one, the aesthetics of that are a different story again, aren't they? So that's the underpinning push, because we've seen the same. We have customers ask quite often, can we put these on walls or down the garden on pergolas and stuff, all these things they're thinking about to avoid it. We had one actually in Beverley last week where it's a 4-story townhouse in a conservation area and the roof was totally off limits. They weren't allowed to do anything on it, even changing the colour of the paint, so they certainly couldn't put solar panels up there. And he was like, well, could we put them down the fence? You're seeing all these fence solar panels now. Could we put them around my garden office building? It's right at the end of the garden, no shading, south facing. But it's got one of the rubber roofs. He didn't really want a ballasted system on there. So you can see people looking at this, and it should be an option. But I guess it needs to be more of the realms of calculations and MCS approved process rather than us making a best guess at it, and you did a better guess than we did because you had 3 rails on yours with those cool little slip-in stops. We just had 2 rails and put some concrete screws in careful positions to stop the clamps from falling out. So you wrestled with it a bit better than we did. Myself and Matty were chatting the other day actually saying, yeah, that was a really good idea. Why didn't we think of that? So it's like...
Yeah, well, I mean, that the 3 rails, I mean, I mentioned it, I think I mentioned it on the, I can't remember if I mentioned it on our Instagram stories or not, but the 3 rails was actually something that came from Josh and Dean, probably Dean because of sort of his experience of it and kind of trying to overkill it, because obviously it's it was either a 510 or 530 watt panel, but that means it's over 2 meters in height because it was in portrait. So we really wanted to pin it back to the wall so there was no kind of vibration or anything that could cause a bit of slippage or any movement. And because there's no real standard fixing system for a system like that, you are kind of making it up. And I don't want to be waking up in the middle of the night thinking, God, I hope that customer's panel's still on his wall. I'd rather spend an extra couple of hours and get another rail in there. Yes, we're not in the clamping zone, but we also don't have as much flex on that panel anyway. So all these things, you make compromises to do this. But this is where these bespoke systems really test you as a company to be able to go, right, this is the solution the customer wants. We could make more money just ignoring that person and going and just putting our focus in another customer that just wants a standard on-roof system that we've got all our pricing sorted for. But there's an intrigue there, isn't there, when you get challenged with something like that. And he was an existing customer, and I wanted to do it to see if it could work, how it would work, and give us some data to really reflect on over a year's period, for example, and go, this is how much this panel has actually generated. So, yeah, works for him and works for us as well.
Yeah, I mean, the real thing, obviously, as you've said, there's the vibration on there. But I was thinking like the wall as well and the fixings into it. You're kind of pulling and push out forces as your roof that you're used to with a wall. If it's a gable or a double skin wall or whatever, you never know if they're in 2 separate places and that wind is rustling around it, doing a bit of that. Could it pull the gable down, and spreading that out across 3 fixing points essentially makes a lot of sense. Now, I've reflected on that. I mean, our particular installation was very different. It was overclad in timber. It was more a barn than a house, and concrete blocks. It was really, really strong, so I've got no worries about it. But I think if we was doing it in a similar situation to what you did with a brick wall, we'll definitely do that. Because you can't be sure that the wall ties are in there, can you? I mean, they should be. We've all seen these new build houses when it's a bit windy and the whole gable's just blown off without solar panels on it.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that gets me thinking that, are we hanging this on there? There's the weight of itself, and it's all like pulling down essentially, isn't it, that weight?
Yeah.
And then when it gets windy, what's going on with that?
Yeah, exactly. And this is what I was really worried about. And but for a larger system, because I've already had some messages on Facebook and what have you, because it seems like, not that there's anything wrong with it, but it seems like the wall-mounted side of things is kind of a DIYer's dream, because it means they don't have to get on the roof and they can probably do it themselves. So you have to be a little bit careful what you recommend. But the thing that I'm worried about is if you start putting a lot of panels on one face of a roof, obviously of a wall, that you're going to need to be doing some structural assessments, getting someone to actually assess it, because like you say, you've got that extra weight hanging on that gable, and if it pulls that off, that's not only just causing an issue for the wall, but it's causing an issue for the roof that's maybe sat on that and all this other stuff. So I've enjoyed doing that one. We enjoyed doing it, and I've enjoyed filming it. But I think if we're going to do that to any decent scale, probably over like 3 panels, like if we're doing 4, 5, 6 panels all in one big section, I think we'd really be looking at getting a structural surveyor in to really look at what we could actually do.
Thank God you said 3, because ours was 3.
Yeah.
we're just in that limit. But it's it is. That's exactly the worry, that we don't know these things, do we? And when you've got no real guidance in software, and even with the best intents, if you did know, you can't see in that cavity to know how it's constructed. And if these panels are 25 kilos each and you're hanging 10 of them across someone's wall, I mean, it's an extreme example, but there's some weight there of itself. And the solar scare, again, that's another great move, because there's the deflected airflow then, isn't there? You're not getting that wind zipping up under it, because it's like the pull out rather than pushing at that stage, because the wall's there anyway, isn't it? It's going to be withstanding that pushing element on it, but it ain't going to have the sucking underneath pulling it over.
Yeah, exactly. And that was more by the customer's design, because they've got solar skirt across all the roofs, and he wanted it on that. But exactly that point when I saw the guys after they'd fitted it, I was like, that's actually going to work as a real benefit, because the system doesn't stand up off the wall as far as it stands up off the roof, because you haven't got the hook and everything else. It's actually quite tight to get the solar skirt in. So ventilation is slightly impeded, but it means you haven't got that wind whipping behind the panel and causing that suction to try and rag it off the wall. And so I'd rather have a panel that's getting slightly warm for the morning than having it pull the gable down. But like I said right at the start, it was completely made up by what we could find. Put a lot of effort into trying to find a wall-mounted system. They're all very bespoke in the design of them. I think some fixings have them, some fixings have everything that you could ever want. But I couldn't find anything that wasn't like a proper facade system that you have like maybe 100 panels on. So we just had to, a bit like yourself with your one, we've basically used the same equipment, haven't we? Both used the Van der Valk kit to fix it too. But I'm really, really excited to explore that, because I do think that'll become really popular for the reasons that we've mentioned. Because, you know, this customer wanted this because he only had 4 panels facing east, and he had a lot of panels that were sort of southwesterly, but he was struggling on that morning generation. So he actually put in a 500 watt plus panel on his east roof, has absolutely boosted that generation in that morning period, because the way that the sun hits that building, it puts that panel in sunlight, direct sunlight, for I think up until about 12:30, 1 o'clock. So he has a full morning from about sort of 6 in the morning. So he gets a really good benefit from that, and it's really boosted his generation. I'll have a little look and see how well it's done today.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, because it's another sunny day up here I assume it's just someone in Yorkshire, if it's a local.
Yeah, up in Newcastle, actually, this guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's still sunny up in Newcastle as well. But
yeah,
it's an interesting one, and I wonder if any of the other installers watching this, if you've done wall-mounted systems, drop them in the comments, because it'd be interesting to see how you've approached it, if you've managed to find some fixing kit that we're not aware of, or if you've taken the approach that we have by blending and adapting components we typically use on a roof.
Yeah. Well, so to give you an idea, so today, and this is good because I've got the solar edge element on this, so I can actually break it down as to what's happening here. But that panel has produced, so this is just for today, 1.71 kilowatt hours. The panels that are facing the same way but that are on the roof above, they've done 1.88. So there's only 0.1 of a kilowatt hour difference between the two. And the best panels on this job, the ones that are just southwesterly, they're more south than southwesterly, they've done 2.31. So they're not far off. And that's added over this week, that's added 5.39 kilowatt hours to this property's weekly generation. So we're recording on a Thursday, so it's going to be upwards of kind of 7 kilowatt hours for this week. And the main part of that roof, those panels have done about 7.7 kilowatt hours. So it's done about sort of 2 kilowatt hours less than the best panels on that roof. But it's not all just about, this is something I've learned over time with when people have systems and you're keeping in touch with them, which is probably unique to companies like ourselves, where we're not a big national company that just bangs them in for fun everywhere. You actually keep a relationship with these customers, is that you find things that they want the system to do that you maybe didn't. You just looked at an annual generation. You looked at, right, it's going to give you 5,000 kilowatt hours this year. But what actually happens when a customer starts to have a system? That customer's had the system for 2 years, 2.5 years maybe, and he's learned a lot about how the system works, when he should be using power, when he should force an export, all this stuff. And he identified this little gap in the morning where he wasn't able to generate. So not all customers will be that interested in trying to identify these little gaps, but when someone lives with a system that they've paid good money for, those customers then know how it could be slightly improved. And so it's not always just about the annual generation, it's when that generation occurs to best suit that customer's life. And so he was always falling short in the mornings because he only had those 4 panels that were facing east. So now he's got 5, but with one of them being a 530 watt, let's say, that's really boosted his morning generation and allowed him to be more flexible in the morning, which is really good.
Yeah, I mean, it really is, isn't it? And it can reduce the requirement for battery storage as well. If you can generate for longer windows through the day, you don't need a bigger size capacities to store up that power at peak generation windows. And, you know, it's a way of approaching it where you're not forced down this road, if you like, of just a south-facing roof and a 10 to 15 kilowatt hour battery. You can maybe look at positioning some panels in a fence line or on a wall or a garage flat roof system, and maybe drop your battery spec down a little bit, because you can make use of that generation window for longer. We have those conversations. I had one actually, I think it was yesterday or the day before, with a customer who was umming and ahhing between using this, blessed with lots of roof space, just using a south-facing roof for all these panels that they wanted, or blending a few around some east, west and south-facing roofs. And when you have a conversation with customers and explain about that early morning generation, the late evening generation, and it's that bell-shaped curve, isn't it, that we're all looking for, a big fatter window of power, really, that they start to think, oh yeah, that actually makes sense, and that would suit our lifestyle before we go to work in the morning, and later on in the evening having that little top-up on extra. And the wall-mounted stuff or fences can play a part in that. I think panel prices are driving it out at the minute because they're rock bottom. I think I can't see them going any lower. Probably we spoke about that on another topic, but going higher. So while that is the case, it makes a lot of sense to get as much in as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do see it on these Facebook groups. The Facebook groups aren't good for an awful lot, but they are good for, you know, seeing articles and things like that people share, because there's a lot of people that have a really firm interest in the solar and renewables game. And one thing that I saw someone post was that people were not buying fence panels anymore. They were buying solar panels to put in their fence, because actually the panels were cheaper than buying like a wooden fence panel.
That's interesting.
I'm not even sure they were even connecting them up. I think they were just kind of having them there as like this different sort of bougie fence. But obviously, if they did connect them up, it would have a double benefit. But I think this brings into a sort of question we've covered a lot of the time is how are we future-proofing the installs we're doing now on roofs for people potentially wanting fence systems or wall-mounted systems? Because we've spoken, again, like I've mentioned, a lot about microinverters, optimizers, and all of this sort of stuff. And when you start looking at doing funky things like putting wall panels in, fence-mounted panels, unless you're going to put a whole new separate system in there, you kind of need like your optimization to allow that to merge in to that system for 2 reasons or 3 reasons. 1, so you can monitor how it's doing. It's kind of like the weakest reason, I suppose. 2, so that you can optimize any shading from the building, because you're mounting them lower. You're probably going to get some shading like this one does. This one gets shaded from the house after 12:30 that's next door. And 3, so you can actually put a bigger panel in than the ones that you've put in 2.5 years ago. So like for us, those panels on that job in specifically, that had, was it 4 or 5 different panel sizes and brands, because we'd added different ones that you'd seen over time. They were all black, so they didn't really look any different, but there was some Q cells. I think there were like 335, or can't remember, but they say like 350. There was an LG that was 410 or something like that. There was a Perlite 400, and now there was this ICO 510. But all that is working because in this case we use Solar Edge, and the optimizers are there synchronizing those panels into the system, because it needs to make sure that string voltage is fixed, like we mentioned on another podcast. So that just means that you could have, you know, almost like an unlimited number of different brands. Every panel on that roof could be a different brand and different size within reason, as long as the optimizers are compatible. the optimizers will integrate that panel into the system. So when we're fitting a cheap and cheerful two string standard system where the customer has maybe expressed a view to maybe expanding the system, yes, you can expand it with an additional inverter, but then you get into the realms of the difficulties with like startup voltages and stuff as well. Because if you're only fitting one panel on one wall at maybe 40 or 50 volts, you're going to struggle to hit that startup voltage as well, aren't you?
You're dragging the DNO back into things as well, aren't you? As soon as you start adding more generation in terms of inverters, that can be a tricky conversation beyond just your increased generation of the panels themselves. So it makes a lot of sense. I guess that's the Solar Edge killer feature, isn't it? Because the Tiger system, as I understand, Tiger, wouldn't work in that same way.
Right.
You get, I think, about 30% it'll take out if you've got panels on different orientations and aspects, but you can't go really blending them too much, certainly in their wattage rating as well. They just don't like it. They need to be the same panels, same wattage, and ideally same aspect. Kind of just takes out some of the lumps and bumps from shading, I suppose. But for Solar Edge, as you've said and we spoke about before on the podcast, that's not the case, is it? And N-phase is another one with the microinverters where you can kind of string them up however you like because it's done in the microinverter on the back of the panel. But that's an expensive way to go about it. And then do you want AC microinverters all down your fence line? Probably not.
Yeah, it's a tricky one with that because you would, with the microinverters, you then need the DNO back out again as well because you're adding. So yeah, so for me, the DC optimization side is better as long as your inverter is big enough to handle the extra capacity. Like with that system we installed there, it was a 6 kilowatt Solar Edge inverter. You can if you had them all on the same roof, it's a 200% oversizing, but obviously you can go over that if you've got panels that aren't going to be generating during a certain time. Like we had panels over every different roof, a wall, all that sort of stuff. So it meant that actually it's never going to receive the full power outage of all those panels added together because they're on one, you've got a load of panels on the north facing side of it for a house. So all of this sort of stuff is where the unique and bespoke design comes in. And that's what sucks your time in the office, but you provide that solution for the customer. So
I mean, absolutely. If you go into the trouble of putting panels on walls, you want to wring every last drop from them in there, don't you? Roofs as well, and I can't think of any better way to do it than using Solar Edge, to be fair. So maybe they're going to come back into the equation, which is another topic we're going to touch into on a future episode. But you can see why that would be very effective to make that play nice. When people are looking at all of these different places to pop panels rather than just the atypical nice big south-facing roof. And there's lots of people who will be in that position. They'll have a big south-facing roof that they can load up with 10, 12 big panels, and that's all they're ever gonna need. But for those people who aren't in that position, it's nice to have the options, isn't it, where they can reach into the toolkit and still take part in this net zero effort and run their homes on sunshine like everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've obviously seen a big change in how people use batteries from self-consumption. Some still are self-consumption, but a lot of people are now time of use. And so batteries have kind of moved on in terms of how they're used and, just the technology in them and all of that. Solar and storage, I was having a really good chat with a guy that's brought kind of, I hesitate to say the first sodium battery into the UK because I'm sure there's probably been some sort of little startups that have tried to do it, but certainly I think that's available from Midsummer now, and that was a really good chat, and he was explaining the complications that they've had with trying to develop that because sodium cells expand, and so they've had to allow room for the cells to expand and contract, all this like crazy stuff, and so maybe it's time that the panels now, instead of just getting bigger and higher output, which is obviously important in terms of getting the most out of the surface area that they cover, maybe we should be looking at the colour of the panels to match rendering. Or, I've seen is it Urena or something like that have like a terracotta panel and all these sort of things that might just blend them into like a render or a brick wall if they're more of a clay looking panel and all this sort of stuff, which sounds crazy, but I know there's companies in America that do it to match the shingles that they put on their houses and things. because I reached out to him on Instagram saying, do you sell into the UK? So there's all these sorts of innovations that potentially wall mounted panels might unlock that actually would blend them into people's homes better than just a big panel on the side of a white rendered house.
Yeah, I mean, innovation's rapid in this sector, isn't it? And it's consumers driving it, I suppose, and the mass adoption of solar power around the world. You can see things like that very easily coming forward, and it would make things aesthetically even nicer. I actually quite like the look of an all black panel. I've got to be honest. I think they look all right. It wouldn't bother me, but in the world we live, some people like stuff and some people don't, and maybe when it's your neighbour start staring at it, you need to be a bit more conscious of that if it's on a wall and rather than a roof. But yeah, it's an interesting area of discussion, and like I say, it is all very much consumer driven. We've been seeing some of our inquiries totally change in terms of the inverters, because you mentioned that a minute ago, where people are looking now at inverter sizes more towards running heat pumps in winter than they are the solar power coming into them. So you might only have a 5 kilowatts generation, but a customer's looking at an 8 kilowatt, 10 kilowatt inverter because they've got a great big heat pump that they want to run off battery storage in winter. And that's a completely different equation to probably what you started with when you're undersizing your inverters to your generation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that has been a transition. And the reality is, you get up above any inverters above 5 kilowatts, you've got the same DNO process to go through. So even if things are wound back slightly after that, pretty much all of our DNOs are above the 5 kilowatt kind of fast track, which is a bit frustrating. But it's these people are wanting bigger inverter systems because they are usually coupling batteries on the DC side, so they're wanting to discharge those batteries quicker through that inverter into the property, and so therefore want a bigger inverter to deliver more power quicker, and that means that it looks weird. It looks weird in terms of the paperwork because putting 5 panels on this building, but you've got a 10 kilowatt inverter. What's going on? But it's because there's a big battery stack sat behind it, and you're wanting to charge and discharge that system nice and quickly. So it's ever changing. It is ever changing, and the thought of this technology being around when I first started is just crazy, and you wonder where it goes over the next 10 years.
Yeah, it's boiling back to this consumer demand, isn't it? It happens with cars, with smartphones, with solar PV systems. Consumers want things, and industry reacts to supply it, and the wall mounted and fence panels is part of that, and the sizing of batteries and inverters and these innovations with sodium batteries, assuming that's more pitched towards safety. I imagine it's a safer chemistry than lithium ion, and it is that process that is pushing that forward. So people wanting panels on a wall isn't me and Sam waking up one day thinking, you know what, I'm fed up of putting panels on roofs. We're going to start putting a few of these on people's side walls or whatever. It's because customers are asking, isn't it? That's what they want. The demand is there. And if it's a Marmite subject because other people don't like it, well, such is life, I suppose. It's just how it works, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think almost people potentially don't like it straight away because it is very different. But then when they're looking at their own energy consumption and thinking, well, I can only get so many panels on my roof because I've got a dormer, I've got a chimney that shades that big part. I've got this nice big kind of south-facing wall that no one really sees, or they might see it, you might not be that bothered, but when they actually start exploring how much energy can be unlocked from that wall, suddenly it's kind of like, well, actually, I prefer to have a lot lower bills than see those panels now and again. And what you mentioned there about kind of customers asking for it and then solutions being provided and products being provided, that was something that I found at Solar and Storage. There was a company called SL Rack that have a wall-mounted system. It's some weird offshoot of Schletter. I don't want to get into the legals of that because I don't know it. I don't want to get sued. But it's some sort of dispute that happened, and so they set up a different company. And SL Rack have pitched mount systems, pitch roof systems, but they also have this wall-clad system as well, which wouldn't have been that suitable for the one I did, but would be suitable for kind of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, multiples of the panels on a decent sized wall, because it's just really well thought out. And so that's a system that I'm going to check in with, I think, going forward when this video goes live. if we have some more people wanting it, that's probably what I'll look at pricing.
Yeah. That was interesting because I've edited the video from Sam's trip to solar and storage today, and that was one of the ones that actually spiked my interest because if you're going across a long span, the wall's never going to be, well, not a new build anyway, it's not going to be plumb, is it? And you need some adjustment other than an aluminium rail screwed to a wall because your panels will match that shape, and that'll be more of an eyesore than brickwork moving in and out as you go along. So it seemed like a good option.
Yeah, it did. And the guy was heavily German, which is fine. I'm not going to think about that. So it was quite a tricky conversation to get all the specific details, but I had a really good video about it. And if you search SL Rack wall mounted system, it looked very, very good. And the podcast is probably out.
It will be.
It'll be out by now. So there'll be a podcast out there from my trip to solar and storage. So have a look at that and keep your eye out for SL Rack if you are interested in a wall mounted solution. I did my best to cover the majority of that system because it was something that really piqued my interest. There's going to be more conversations about this wall mounted stuff because you get into the realms of earthing, different earthing questions. You start having panels on a fence where the panels are in contact with the ground. And regulations have, if they were already struggling to keep up, I think as soon as this sort of stuff comes out, it's going to be even more difficult.
That's a can of worms, isn't it? That is, because your typical ground mount, whatever you do with it, at least it is anchored generally into the mass of earth, which the panels are then clamped to. When you're on a wall, you got the same kind of issues that you would have with EV charge points and other metal bits outside, apart from, unless it's got M-phase or something like that, microinverters underneath. It's just DC. So it's like there's the safety aspect, isn't there? And then there's the planning aspect. And all that merging together, it does get a bit murky.
It does, and something that makes me think about the fence-mounted panels is that they're a lot more likely to get damaged, and that damage is a lot easier to access. You've got access for kids to be playing with.
Footballs booted against it.
Yeah, cricket balls, golf balls. You've also got more direct water because people might be using hose pipes. So you've got all these extra things to think about where it goes above and beyond plonking them. Basically, we can't use out of reach as a method for domestic, but kind of solar panels were out of reach for the majority of installations, whereas now we're bringing these panels into reach, into danger, and making them accessible to some of the most vulnerable people in our household. So that then goes, right, well, maybe rapid shutdown at the panel level that we've spoken about is going to be almost like a necessity because, again, speaking from the solar edge side of things, that is constantly doing every time it starts up, it does an insulation resistance test. So looking at that and shutting that system down quickly is going to be quite important, but it's whether or not the popularity of this sort of system just booms before the regulations or the best practice comes out. So maybe it's time for us to start really looking at that, because I do think this is going to be quite a big thing going forward.
Yeah, that's a good shout for the regs people out there to look at that, the fence ones especially, because it could be that, I don't know, a bird flies into one of the panels or something and gives it a micro crack that you can't even see, and it just kind of sits there till it starts raining, or someone comes along and touches it. You don't know, do you? People probably start hanging clothes over them to dry them or something because it's a handy, clean surface, and then you've got all the shading and hotspots maybe. There's all those kind of avenues to go down that you maybe wouldn't even think are a thing because we've not been considering it. It's like a new thing, isn't it?
The flexibility of the shading is a massive one, because even for wall mounted systems, because like with that job that we did consider putting the second panel lower down, but it was because of the fence being quite high next to it that it basically the fence would always shade that panel. But if you've got a fence line that's a lot further back on a property, and suddenly you're fitting a panel that's maybe 300 mil off the ground, suddenly then you're pulling bins past it. The kids are pushing their bikes past it that maybe crash into it. All these extra things. If you were doing a risk assessment, we all do risk assessments, I suppose, in our minds about this sort of stuff. But when you're actually looking at that, the risk level is going to go through the roof, because you're putting something accessible and you're putting it in a place that is going to potentially be more dangerous to that person, because they're going to be running past it in the rain. They're going to be, like I said, trying to push things past it and bumping into it, and the wear and tear of that panel is going to be so much higher. So I would be very reluctant to kind of put that on just a standard string inverter really that doesn't have some additional features. But yeah, who knows? It's a bit of a can of worms, and I think it would be really good to explore it and try and jump past it. Get the regulations up to speed if it does potentially take off, which I think it might.
We maybe need to try and get a planning officer of some sort to come on and have a chat with us, because I'd be interested to ask them about that, because we know with the ground mounted side of things, you're going through planning. I wonder if it's the same. I mean, we've never looked at it, so I don't know if it's the same for a fence. You'd think aesthetically it probably should be, but is it? And I'm sure wall mounted stuff's permitted development because it's on your property and it's not more than 200 mil off the surface, so there's no reason why it shouldn't be. But should those kind of things be falling into the realms of planning if neighbouring properties are looking at it? So maybe if it's on the front of your house or the back of your house and it's wall mounted, you need to go through planning. I don't know.
Yeah, because there are other things to consider, and something that we didn't consider on this one, because you couldn't actually see this property from this wall that we put this panel on from the road. So I was kind of quite relieved that our first one wouldn't actually be seen in case it looked like an absolute dog's dinner, which it didn't in the end, which was good. But is glare as well.
Yeah.
And so if we've all seen it with, I think there was a recent article about kind of headlights being all LED now and really startling people. But if you've got these, a set of 5 or 10 panels on the side of a property that, is reflecting light, as people come up over a hill, you've got all these crazy things that we've maybe not had to worry about before, because panels have been at 35 degrees above a lot of traffic, and are kind of reflecting the light back up. Whereas now we're reflecting the light directly across. So are we looking at potentially only using anti-glare panels that reflect the light in all different directions to kind of reduce its strength? All these things, it is a bit of a can of worms, but so was fitting panels on people's houses back when we first started. So it's not problems we can't get over, but it just wants that careful thought at this stage. And for me, like potentially an anti-glare panel with something like Solar Edge or Enphase or Tigo, if there's enough panels, all this sort of stuff to try and add that safety element and give you the performance element in terms of for washing lines being put up and a heavy bed sheet being put near one panel one day and then the next day there's nothing there. Like all this flexible shading is going to be quite an interesting thing for us to get over, I think, if we do roll this out.
Yeah, I think we've cracked open a can of worms on this.
Oh no,
topic.
not another.
I think this is one, like you've said, that we'll come back to, maybe with a panel manufacturer or somebody from the world of planning, and see how that kind of plays out, because I think there is a bigger discussion around all that. We've raised more issues than we've solved, I think, with that
Standard.
chat. So I think we've given that a wide discussion. And there's anything else you want to add?
No, I think we've opened Pandora's box, and we'd love to hear what your experience is. If you're an installer watching this, are you getting asked for it? If you're a customer watching this, are you interested in it? And if you make the regs, what's your thoughts on it? Because we certainly don't have the answers. We just have lots of questions. So we'd like to hear your input on that.
Yeah, just echo that and let you take us out on this one,
Yeah.
mate.
No, thank you very much for joining us again for another episode on the Renewables Podcast. Please like, subscribe, and like I mentioned just a minute ago, please leave any comments about what your opinion is on this topic, depending on who you are and what challenges you're facing out there. And so, yeah, thanks very much for watching and listening. We'll see you on the next one.